I was setting the last tray on the buffet table when I noticed my seat was gone. Not moved, gone. A folded card on a cheap plastic chair near the kitchen read, "Family help." My sister-in-law, with her perfect manicure and performative smile, clinked her wine glass and said, "We figured you'd be more comfortable where you can jump up if someone needs refills." I stood there, heart pounding, while everyone laughed like it was harmless. But then I saw my son walk in wearing the one suit he never takes out unless it's serious. He wasn't smiling. I wish I could say this surprised me, but it didn't. Not really. That family always knew how to smile while cutting you. And I'd become an expert at patching myself up in silence. So the card was a new low. A printed one, not even handwritten. They'd planned it, spent time on it. And yet no one batted an eye. Not my ex-husband, who busied himself carving the turkey as if I didn't exist. Not my brother-in-law, who chuckled and muttered something about traditions. And not my mother-in-law, who gave me that pitying smile she's perfected over decades of pretending kindness. I stood there for a moment too long, frozen with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, then quietly took the chair they'd assigned me. It screeched a little as I dragged it back near the sink next to the trash bin. Of course. The food was beautiful because I made it that way. They'd asked me to handle the basics, this year. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, 3 pies and rolls from scratch. Then they showed up with a $19 store-bought salad in a plastic bowl and said they wanted to contribute too. I didn't cook because I was told to. I did it for my son. I always do it for him. That's what I told myself as I served slices of pie to people who barely made eye contact. That's what I whispered inside when I overheard my sister-in-law joking to her friends. Well, every family has their little Cinderella. They called me quiet, modest, helpful. The kind of words people use when they want to praise you without respecting you. I listened, nodded, smiled when they needed me to. I played my part so well that they forgot I had any lines of my own. Even my chair didn't have my name anymore. Just a title that told the truth, but only their version of it. My son had been quiet all evening. Not in a sulking way, just watching. Observing the way he always does when something's off. I noticed him look at the family help card when he thought no one was watching. His eyes lingered on it longer than necessary. I knew that look. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. He's a quiet one too, like me, but sharper than I ever was at his age. Maybe sharper than I am even now. Dinner was served without ceremony. The real family went first, naturally. I waited until the last plate was picked clean before fixing my own. Cold mashed potatoes. Dry turkey. I ate it standing up, which felt appropriate. A few cousins asked me where the extra gravy was, even though they were standing next to the kitchen drawers. I answered them anyway. My job, I guess. They didn't mean to be cruel. That's the worst part. Cruelty requires intention, and they didn't even think about it. To them, this was just how things were. I was the helper. The girl who never left. The woman who married their golden boy, gave birth to his child, and stayed behind when he left for someone shinier. I didn't make waves. I didn't fight over custody. I didn't challenge the will. I just stayed. And in staying, I made it easy for them to erase me. And yet today felt different. Not louder. Just heavier. Like something was about to crack under the weight of all the silence I'd swallowed over the years. And then I heard the front door open. The screen door creaked the way it always did when the spring caught. I looked up and there he was. My son. Changed out of his wrinkled hoodie and into the suit he wore when his grandfather died. His hair combed, jaw set, face unreadable. And in his hand, something rectangular. Slim. Not a gift. Not a card. Something else. He walked right past his cousins, right past the untouched punch bowl and the makeshift photo booth my sister-in-law had set up for her Instagram story. He didn't stop to greet anyone. He came straight to me. And with a calm voice that didn't match his age, he said, "Mom, can I talk to you?" Outside. There was a pause around the room, just long enough for people to notice. My sister-in-law glanced at him, then at me, like she was calculating how much drama she was willing to tolerate. My ex-husband stiffened, knife still halfway through a slice of turkey breast. My mother-in-law blinked twice, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" she asked him with a too sweet smile, the kind she only uses when cameras are around. He didn't even look at her. "Just a quick talk," he said again, already turning toward the door. I followed him out without a word. My legs were moving before my brain caught up. The evening air was sharp with the smell of leaves and distant wood smoke. He stopped just past the porch light, near the old swing set no one touched anymore. He turned to me, eyes fierce. "I saw the card," he said. "The chair. Everything." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He opened the folder. There were papers inside. Legal papers. The kind that have signatures and stamps and clipped corners. I stared at them, then at him. "I went through Dad's stuff," he said quietly. "The old files. There's something you need to see." I took the folder, hands trembling. "And Mom," he added, his voice even softer now. "You don't have to sit in that chair again. Ever." Behind us, the door creaked open. We turned. My sister-in-law was standing on the porch, arms crossed, her face twisting into the same polite mask she always wore when she sensed something slipping out of her control. "What's going on?" she asked. My son took a step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You'll find out in a moment," he said, holding out a second envelope. "I was going to wait until dessert. But this feels like the right time." And just like that, everything started to shift. She didn't open the envelope right away. She just stood there on the porch, gripping it like it might bite her. Her smile cracked for a second before she caught herself and laughed, that dry, dismissive kind of laugh people use when they think they're still in control. "What's this supposed to be?" "A school project," she said, like she didn't notice the tension rippling through the air around her. My son didn't flinch. He just turned back to me, calm as ever, and said, "You don't have to go back in there if you don't want to." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years I didn't see my little boy. I saw a man. Not because of the suit or the paperwork, but because of the steel in his voice. The clarity. Somewhere between setting the table and tonight, he had grown up when I wasn't looking. We sat on the porch steps as the laughter inside the house tried to push through the glass like it could erase what just happened. I held the folder close to my chest. I hadn't opened it yet. I wasn't ready. Not because I didn't trust him, but because part of me was still bracing for disappointment. I had spent so long convincing myself I didn't need justice, just peace. That letting it go was strength. But now, sitting in the cold beside my son, I felt something else stirring. Something that had been asleep for years. Not anger. Not even pain. It was something older. Something like remembering who I was before they convinced me I was less. It hadn't always been like this. Once, a long time ago, they called me family. Or at least pretended to. When I married into that house, I was young and so eager to belong that I didn't notice how they only praised me when I was useful. I thought love meant service. I thought silence meant harmony. I cooked their meals, remembered their birthdays, held their secrets, and never once asked for anything in return. That was the role they carved out for me, and I stepped into it like it was a gift. And then the cracks began. It started small. Invitations that arrived late or not at all. Jokes that felt less like teasing and more like testing how much they could get away with. My ex-husband began fading too, less warmth, more absence. When he left, he said it was mutual. That I had become distant. But the truth was I had just stopped clinging. I stayed connected to that family for one reason. My son. I wanted him to have roots, to know his cousins, to grow up with big tables and full houses. So I kept going to dinners. I kept making pies. I kept smiling while they handed me trays and forgot to thank me. I thought I was doing the noble thing. But noble things are quiet killers when no one notices. And children notice more than we think. Mine did. The first time I realized he was watching was last winter. It was another gathering, his cousin's birthday, I think. I'd spent the whole day helping in the kitchen. When the cake was brought out, they asked me to take the photo so the whole family could be in the shot. I smiled and did it, of course. But later, when we got home, he asked me, "Why don't you ever get to be in the pictures?" It hit me like a glass of cold water. I didn't have an answer. And I didn't know he'd been keeping score ever since. In the weeks before this Thanksgiving, I noticed him digging around in old boxes. He said he was working on a school genealogy project, and I didn't question it. But now I realized what he was really doing. He found documents, wills, agreements, records of how much I'd put into that house. Money, time, things I'd signed, things they ignored. His father's old files that no one thought I'd look at again. But he did. He saw how they took from me and made me feel like it was charity. How they twisted help into obligation. He saw every unspoken injustice I had buried beneath politeness and called it out without asking for my permission. I finally opened the folder. My breath caught when I saw the top page. It wasn't just a letter. It was a formal notice. My name. Their signatures. Property rights I never claimed. Proof of inheritance. Things I had forgotten even existed. My son had contacted a lawyer. Quietly. Carefully. Without telling me until it was all in place. He had done more than just notice. He had acted. We sat in silence for a while. The house behind us glowed with warm lights and cold hearts. I could hear my sister-in-law's voice rising, trying to laugh it all off, trying to pretend nothing had shifted. But something had. The weight I carried alone all these years had moved. It hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer mine to carry alone. Eventually I stood. I walked to the door and stepped back inside, the envelope still in my hand. The room quieted, a ripple of discomfort spreading as they saw me. My sister-in-law was mid-sentence, but stopped when she saw the look on my face. Not anger. Not sadness. Just clarity. I walked past the buffet table, past the fancy centerpiece she'd bragged about on social media, and gently placed the envelope at her seat. I believe this is yours, I said, voice calm, measured. She looked down at it, then up at me, her eyes darting around the room as if begging someone to jump in, to laugh, to lighten the moment. No one did. And then, without looking back, I returned to my plastic chair. I didn't touch my plate. I didn't speak. But my son did. He stood, adjusted his sleeves, and said just loud enough for the whole table to hear, "I hope everyone enjoyed dinner. I brought dessert too. It's in the folder." The silence that followed was almost beautiful. No one moved. Forks froze mid-air. My sister-in-law's hand hovered over her wine glass like she wasn't sure whether to grab it or duck behind it. My mother-in-law blinked slowly, as if trying to reset a scene that had clearly gone off script. My son didn't flinch. He walked calmly to the table, lifted the envelope, and slid out the second document beneath the legal notice. He held it up between two fingers. It was a copy, clean, precise, official. He didn't raise his voice. That's the part that made them all lean in. He didn't need to. His calm was sharper than any scream. "This is a record of the estate settlement," he said. "Signed 3 years ago. It confirms that my mother was entitled to 1/3 of this property when Dad moved out. That includes a share in the house and land this family's been gathering in for decades. But you all told her she didn't want anything. That she agreed to nothing. That it was too late to ask." He placed the document on the table, then pulled out the next page. "This is the email from the attorney she never saw. The one that was lost in the shuffle, supposedly. The one that outlines her financial contributions to this place over 15 years. Repairs. Upgrades. Even your wedding," he added, glancing at my sister-in-law. "The one she paid for half of. Not that you ever mentioned it again." The silence was no longer awkward. It was heavy. My ex-husband sat with his jaw clenched, his fork still resting against his plate. He hadn't made eye contact with me once. My mother-in-law looked pale, her smile dropped somewhere between the cranberry sauce and the centerpiece. The cousins were watching with wide eyes, unsure whether to stay still or run for cover. My sister-in-law tried to laugh, a short, nervous sound that fell flat. "This is ridiculous," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the documents. "She never asked for anything. We assumed she didn't want." "She didn't ask," my son interrupted, "because she was too busy surviving all of you." That landed. No one moved. Not even the ones who usually stayed neutral. The weight of that sentence dropped like a stone in a still pond. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't need to. I wasn't there for them. I watched my son instead. My son, who used to hide behind my legs at family reunions. Who used to bring me napkins when I forgot to sit down and eat. Who used to ask why people smiled with their mouths and not their eyes. He stood there now, still and composed, letting the truth echo without force. Just letting it settle where it needed to. He took a breath, calmer than I could ever be, and handed the folder to me like a baton in a quiet war. I opened it, this time without trembling. Inside was a letter, typed, formal but clear. A cease and desist order addressed to the current title holder, informing them of a pending legal review of asset division and breach of verbal contract. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even hostile. It was simply a truth written in black and white. A truth that had been buried beneath years of politeness and gaslighting and your family, but not really. I placed the folder back on the table. No flourish. No speech. Then I stood. And this time I didn't feel small. I wasn't shrinking. I looked at the table of people who had grown used to eating off my back. I looked at my ex-husband who avoided my eyes like they were fire. I looked at the woman who called me help while asking for my recipes. And I didn't say a single word. My silence was finally mine. My son stepped beside me. He touched my elbow gently, and for the first time that evening I felt steady. "I think we're done here," he said. My sister-in-law sputtered, "You can't just, show up and embarrass us with legal threats on Thanksgiving? This is completely inappropriate." He looked at her for a long beat. Then said, "So was erasing her." No shouting. No rebuttal. Just that single sentence that made even the ceiling seem to flinch. We turned and walked toward the door, each step loud despite the softness of our shoes. No one followed. No one called after us. No apology. Just the clink of a fork being gently laid down and the sound of a reality too long ignored finally cracking. When we reached the porch, I felt the cold air hit my face again. It didn't sting this time. It cleared something. My chest felt lighter, like I'd been holding my breath for years, and finally exhaled. "Was it too much?" he asked me as we reached the car. "I didn't want to blindside you." I looked at him, at the boy I raised to be gentle but strong, kind but not weak. I thought of all the times I told him not to make a scene, not to speak out, not to start trouble. And I realized he hadn't made a scene. He made a correction. "No," I said softly. "You gave me something they never did." He tilted his head. "What?" I smiled for the first time that evening. A real smile. "Oh, sure." A seat at the table. Just as I opened the car door, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I hadn't saved but knew all too well. My ex-husband. The text read, "Can we talk?" I didn't know it had gone this far. I stared at it for a moment, then showed it to my son. He read it, then looked back at the house behind us where the lights still glowed through the windows. "Do you want to answer him?" he asked. And I didn't. I didn't want to answer. Not tonight. Not ever, maybe. But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I just said, "Let's go home." And as we pulled away from the driveway, I saw a few faces appear at the window, watching us leave. But none of them stepped outside. They'd had their chance. And this time I wasn't the one staying behind. The next morning the house was quiet. Not theirs, ours. Ours had always been quiet, but today it felt different. Not hollow or wounded. Just peaceful. Like something heavy had finally been put down after years of pretending it didn't exist. I made tea not out of habit or duty but because I wanted to. I didn't check my phone. I didn't open the family group chat that was probably full of apologies wrapped in excuses, or silence so loud it begged to be interpreted. I let it sit. I had nothing left to explain. And for once I didn't feel guilty about it. My son came out of his room in sweatpants, barefoot, and grinning like he hadn't just detonated a legal bomb at a family dinner the night before. He looked lighter too. His shoulders less tense, his eyes brighter. He poured cereal and sat at the table across from me like it was any other Saturday. That was the beautiful part. The way everything had changed and yet nothing needed to. We were okay. Finally. "Do you think they'll actually respond to the letter?" he asked between bites. "Eventually," I said, sipping my tea. "They always do when things start costing them." He nodded, not smiling, just understanding. This wasn't about revenge. It never really was. It was about boundaries. About truth. About refusing to keep bleeding for people who never once offered a bandage. The letter didn't demand money. It didn't even ask for an apology. It simply laid out the rights they'd swept under the rug. And now that the rug had been lifted, they'd have to deal with the dust. By midday the messages started trickling in. My ex-husband first. Another attempt to smooth things over. "You know this isn't what your father would have wanted," he said in a voicemail, pretending to forget that he'd walked away from us both years ago. Then my sister-in-law, sending a clipped text about how I should have just talked to them first. As if I hadn't. As if I hadn't spent a decade trying to talk in ways they'd understand. Small, polite, indirect, quiet. They only noticed now because the volume finally matched their level of ignorance. Then came the surprising ones. A message from my niece. "I'm sorry. I never saw it like that before. I should have spoken up." Another from an aunt I hadn't heard from in 2 years, simply saying, "Good for you." They weren't apologies, not exactly. But they were acknowledgments. And that was more than I'd ever gotten before. That night my son and I sat on the couch watching a rerun of an old show we used to love. The kind with canned laughter and predictable endings. I caught myself laughing, really laughing, and realized how long it had been since I'd done that without flinching. He looked over and smiled at me. "You know," he said, "next year we should do Thanksgiving differently." "How so?" "Just us. No folding chairs. No fake toasts. Just something simple. Maybe a road trip. Or order pizza. Anything but that table." I leaned back into the cushions, feeling the truth of his words settle in my chest. He wasn't just talking about the food. He was talking about rewriting the whole idea of family. Making something honest. Something safe. Something that didn't come with labels like family help. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." A few days later, the formal response came through. My name was now officially listed in the estate review. The lawyer confirmed everything my son had uncovered. And just like that, the weight of pretending I didn't matter in that family structure shifted. It didn't disappear. But it was no longer mine to carry alone. The process would take time, of course. Legal things always do. But something more important had already happened. I had been seen. I had been defended, not by yelling, not by begging, but by truth. That was the part that stayed with me. The way my son had stood up, not in anger but in clarity. He hadn't needed to destroy them. He just needed to show them what they'd tried to erase. And in doing that, he gave me something I hadn't dared to ask for. Restoration. Thanksgiving came and went in that house, and from what I heard, it ended early. People left without dessert. The laughter didn't come as easily. And no one quite knew what to say when someone brought up my name. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Let them sit with their discomfort. I'd sat with mine long enough. The next Sunday, I got a call from my sister-in-law. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was tight, brittle, trying to sound calm but cracking around the edges. "We just want to move forward. It's not good for the family to be divided like this. You're welcome to come by and talk if you're willing to put the past behind you." I deleted it. The past wasn't something I was leaving behind. It was something I was finally letting stand beside me. Not as shame. Not as baggage. But as proof. I didn't need a seat at their table anymore. I had my own now. Built with truth, not invitations. The next time my son came home from school, he brought me flowers. Nothing expensive. Just a wild bunch from the corner shop. He handed them to me without a word, and I didn't ask why. We both knew. This was what healing looked like. Not applause. Not revenge. Just dignity returning home. And that was enough.